In spite of train spotting from railway bridges, embankments or station platforms, they were still not equipped for that first day at the engine shed.
On my first day, I went in and reported to Charge and Clean, and he took me into Bury Shed, and these bloody engines were stood there, and we walked past, and I could not believe what I was seeing, because what you see on a platform and what you see stood outside of them, I mean, bloody wheels were bigger than me.
I'd gone on footplates many a time when I'd been in the station, but when I got in the shed and I was walking down on the flat and the two engines were kicking out steam and smoke at either side, it was a bit frightening.
The rods, driving rods and pistons, to be so close, just couldn't take it all in at first. Climbing onto the footplate was like climbing into the sky.
And then it came to getting on the boiler, and I suddenly realised I was frightened to death. Because I realised then how high up I was.
Looking down, it's like being on top decker, but a double decker. This is only engine. Little Harry Lucas were our foreman. Brilliant little fella. He said, right, we'll have to fix you up with some overalls. 2 pair of bib and brace overalls with a jacket, slop jacket. And you got a serge jacket and a grease top cap, so you're with the bee's knees.
Something told me this is what I want to do. I took to it like a duck to water, really.
The first engine we cleaned was a Class 8 8519.
And all we got for that was a bucket of dirty oil from the stores, which was a mixture of paraffin, all sorts of waste oil, handful of cotton waste, and get to it.
Like, you split it into 3, a tender, a boiler, and motion. Well, motion were worse. That were shit up to bloody 90s motion, throwing all muck about.
It was just a basic, rub the muck off, wipe it with the oil first, then somebody would follow up and wipe it off with the waste. So that it did glisten when it was finished.
When you cleaned an engine, it used to take 8 hours to do that. And you got used to these different locos. But we'd played about on ash pits, emptying ashes out at pit when they'd been disposed of. And we'd aim this ash at a point, see if we could aim for a place. Because we knew that we had to aim in a firebox at certain places. And unknown to it, were all good practical experience. From day one of being an engine cleaner, that were the first thing you were doing. You were learning all about the locomotive, the working parts, what did what, and everything.
Now, one of the first things I learnt was what happened when the coaling plant broke down. And then one day, booked on one morning, 8 o'clock for cleaning, and the foreman cleaner, Harry Baker, said, now you'll be not cleaning today, the coaling plant has broken down. And at the top end of the shed on the short road, number 6 road, there were 3 16-tonners of coal. So up the yard all these boys go, climb into the wagons, and we started to chuck coal in. Of course, this was it like idiots, as you are at that age. You get stuck in, there was coal flying in all directions, but the newness soon wore off. And when we'd filled it up, the shed driver moved it, and he put a Class 8 there. Or when you realised that your coal that you were stood on had started to go down, then you looked up at this thing which was many feet higher than the Wessie tender that you just dealt with. Then the novelty wore off. Then it wasn't long after that before the foreman cleaner came up and said, look, you'll have to get a move on. They're waiting for these engines to be cold. Well, we stopped at 12:30 for dinner, and I always used to go home. And I was absolutely knackered. But back I went again, and we all clambered into these wagons very much slower than we'd done it. Anyway, we all prayed that the coaling plant would start working, and it did the following day. And that was the first real introduction to heaving coal I'd ever had. I did 12 months day cleaning, because you couldn't be passed out for firing until you were 16 years of age. But about 3 months after starting, being one of the thinnest there, I got trained to be a bar lad.
Now the job of fireboxes is, when a locomotive has finished its journey and is due for either what we call a washout or some particular type of exam, the whole fire and smoke box is actually emptied. Well, the train crew, usually that's the driver and the fireman, they clean the fire out and they clean the smoke box. Now it is my job as the firebox lad to get in that firebox when it's cold and start knocking the clinkers off the thingy. Now the only way into the firebox was through the fire hole door. I used to have overalls, and we used to have a cloth, and you used to have a pad, and you used to get in and you used to do it. No goggles, because goggles wasn't around in those days, and you'd go in there and you'd come out like a miller. You'd come out white.
It was very heavy work indeed. And the old man that did it was called Jack Allen. He never wore masks or anything, and he was gasping and wheezing, and you were in a firebox and he was showing you how to knock a brick arch down. All you got was a carbide lamp, and he was wailing this arch from underneath with a great big hammer, and it was dropping down and you couldn't see for dust. Came out, he was black as Harry's hat band. It was dreadful.
You've got the fire hole door. It had a lip plate and it had a baffle plate. Well, you took that out, and now on a big engine it was quite a big hole. But on a small engine it was very small, and then I was only a lightweight and still found it a problem. And when you got in some of the little engines, you couldn't even stand up. But on the big engine, you could go in there and you'd have a long way to go. And to get to knocking the ferrules off the end of the tube plate, you'd have to get on the brick arch. And sometimes it may be still a little worn. And then clean it off. And then take it all off the brick arch itself. Drop it onto the fire bars. Clean all the fire bars. Now you've cleaned all the chippings off, all the stays. And what you've dropped into the ash pan, now you take out.
And then, of course, when Old Allen was off, you got the job to do yourself. So you soon learnt the layout of fire bars. There's no doubt about that. It was rough work for a 15-year-old, but there again, they'd started that at 14 in the old days. You were just one of hundreds that had done it.
And of course, working with older men, overnight you become an older man, because you was listening to old men talking and pulling your legs, and some of the tricks they used to do to you.
We're called bone idle, useless. Kids today are not made of what they used to be. And of course in those days it was not an unknown thing for somebody to clouch around the ear hole if they felt like it. And it did happen. I once got clouted for striking a match I found on footplate. You might want to light a lamp, laddie. You've just wasted a match. I thought, my God. But then afterwards I thought, well, that's the sort of world they came from. You didn't strike a match unless you got a job to do with it.
Perhaps sometimes you felt like crying, but you put up with that because it was part of the initiation, he used to say, you see.
You learnt when to shut your mouth, because everything you did was wrong. Everything you said was wrong.
If you didn't like it, and you soon found out whether you liked it or not, because the job was dirty and it was the dirtiest job imaginable. If you didn't like it, you'd have been gone in the first 2 or 3 weeks. A clean pair of overalls on Monday wouldn't last till finishing time. They were as black again, oil, dirt, grime, coal dust, whatever.
We decided after a short while of trying to scrub cleaners' overalls in the backyard that we'd send them to the dry cleaners. that was one thing we did decide. The passenger engines were kept in nice condition. I even cleaned the Millersdale pull and push engines 1905 and 6. They were still in service when I was cleaning. The railway had lost the interest in keeping these engines anything like clean. So really, you got one that was new out of the works and you could go over it quickly and make it look very nice, but when you got one that had been allocated from another depot to Buxton that hadn't seen as clean as cloth since it came out of the works, it was a grim business. Motions were a grim job. You scraped all the muck off the motion and the motion plates. They were very particular about you scraping the foot framing in the area of the lubricators, where leakage and spillage makes that area very, very dangerous. Quite often you get hauled in. We used to do number 6 mileages, the 60,000 mileage thing for a lot of engines. we used to get engines from Heaton Mersey and lots of other depots around. And when they arrived for number 6 mileage, they used to stand in the bottom of the shed in steam while they withdrew the valves and pistons. Then, quite frequently, you would be made to scrape and clean the front and back buffer beams, wire brush the smoke box, and we used to paint the smoke boxes with smoke box paint, paint the numbers, and one of the fitters or fitters' mates or one of them used to paint the buffer beams, and you used to have to clean the rods for the fitters. So when it was all put back together again, it would at least have a clean motion, painted smoke box and buffer beams. Yes, we had a lot of engines that came for that sort of thing, but our engines were never done at Buxton. Our Class 8s used to go to Springs Branch. I don't know where the Super Ds went to, but the sheds didn't generally do their own.
As I came up as a cleaner and then started building fireboxes, doing bars, you got £7 a week, so that was a massive increase. Plus it was a better job than cleaning.
Filthy work though it was, the money got better as you gained more experience.
They did not expect you to be able to know precisely what you were required to know at the time when you moved from cleaner to past cleaner. And they had what they called a firing school.
In 1957, when I was 16, they started sending us to a school at Bolton for trainee firemen, MIC classes they call them. It's all to do with telling you about engine management, getting to know all parts of the engine, how to fire a locomotive, how to break the coal up to the size of a man's fist, and they'd teach you about signals and gantries and how to read the roads and everything about locos. Whatever you had to know, that's what it was.
Now the one I attended in the summer of '58 was at Stockport Edgeley in the ambulance room. And we'd a locomotive inspector by the name of David Ellsworth, who was a Midland man who wore a bowler hat, the whole business, the long black back. And they went through your rules. And Rule 55, the signing of the book, where your train was stood at a signal which was not track circuited, going into the signal box, signing the book, Rule 55, up line, such and such a time, M. Bentley, was what you put in the book. They had a catch which they put on the levers of the signals that were protecting the rear of your train, and you were supposed to see that that clip was on. The putting down of detonators and how you did it. Firemen must, when not otherwise engaged, assist the driver looking for signals, and all the times when you had to acknowledge signals from a guard in a brake van when you were starting a freight train. All the little things, but you see, they told you that when you were firing, you were under the supervision of the driver. And you did as he said. Wasn't any argument about it. So there was these basic rules that you needed to know, the protection of trains on running lines, Rule 55. They were the things that they went through. Principles of firing. Then on the last day, he would arrange for you to go on footplate of an engine. Those that were dealt with at Manchester Central, they had the best because they came over Peak Forest on a Jubilee. I was passed at Stockport, so I came back on the footplate of 2942 on the long side Buxton empties with 30 empties and 2 coaches and a brake van. But I still remember it. So that was it. And then once the papers came through to the depot to say that you were past cleaner, you then lost your status as a day cleaner and you went on the 4 shift. Still cleaning, or fireboxing, or labouring, knocking up, you did that, you did anything. And of course you didn't get many firing turns to start off with, but things started to speed up.